This is The Civil Fleet, a podcast focused on the activist-led refugee rescue and support missions across Fortress Europe, with me, Ben Coles. In today's episode, we're going to speak with firefighter and refugee rescuer Brendan Woodhouse. Brendan is going to tell us about the book he co-wrote called Doro, which is available now on Unbound Press, and he co-wrote the book with the subject of the book, Doro Goumaneh. I think that's how you say his name. Anyway, Brendan rescued Doro in 2019 aboard the Sea-Watch 3 after Doro had escaped from Libya. Doro and Brendan struck up a friendship, and eventually, while they were waiting for the Italian authorities to allow them to come ashore, Doro asked Brendan to write his story. And so today, Brendan is going to tell us about that story. He's going to tell us about the process of writing the book, what the reception has been to it, and what's happening in Doro's life now. Okay, I'd just like to remind you that the Civil Fleet is not just a podcast, it's also a website with news stories, interviews, investigative stories and more. So go to civilfleet.com to find out more about that. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to help us cover the costs of platforming the rescuers, the refugees, the authors, the lawyers, the journalists, what have yous, if you would like to help us to platform and to continue to platform these amazing people, then you can help us do that with a small donation. The Civil Fleet is entirely run by myself. It's totally self-funded. I've not sold out yet and crammed it full of adverts. Don't think that'll ever happen anyway. But anyway, if you would like to help us cover this cost, you can make a small donation or a huge donation by going to ko-fi.com/civilfleet. That's ko-fi.com/civilfleet. Anything you can do to help will be greatly appreciated. Oh, and one last thing before we get into the episode, we're going to do a giveaway. I've got a large t-shirt, a large black t-shirt with the Civil Fleet's logo on white on it. It looks really cool. Check out us on Twitter and you'll be able to see it. And I'll put it on Instagram too. I would like to give this t-shirt away. It's a spare one. I've got another one for myself and for my girlfriend. They look pretty cool, if I say so myself. So if you'd like the chance to win it, you can quote tweet the podcast or you can tag us in a post on Instagram. Our handles are on Twitter is @FleetCivil. And on Instagram, I think we're just The Civil Fleet, all one word. Quote tweet us or tag us in a story on Instagram. Say something about the podcast and we'll select one at random and subject to costs. I'll send it out to you. I'll send the t-shirt out to you. I think I don't want to spend too much money on this, so I'll keep it to Britain, Ireland or EU countries. Obviously, if you're in Norway, I'll send it there too. So yeah. All you got to do is quote tweet the podcast or tag us in a story on Instagram before August 30th, 2023. And I'll select one of you and send the t-shirt out to you. Right, that is enough of this crap. Let's get on with the episode. Brendan, thank you very much for coming on the Civil Fleet podcast. It's nice to have you back again. I think you might be the first returning guest on the Civil Fleet. I'm not sure. Maybe, I think you are, yes.
Well, I'm very privileged then. Thank you very much for having me.
I think we last had you on in April, I think it was. I've got it written down somewhere. We last had you on, in April 2022. And that was episode 22 of the Civil Fleet podcast. And I believe this one will be episode 43. So it's great to have you been on. It's been 20 episodes since we've had you on. People who've listened to that one before might remember a bit about you, but in case there's people tuning in for the first time, could you give us a bit of a background about yourself? Or I should say, the reason that you're on the podcast today is we're going to talk about a book that you've recently co-written, and it's called Doro, and I'll let you pronounce Doro's surname. So yes, could you please start off, Brendan, by telling us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Brendan Woodhouse. I'm a firefighter in the UK. In my spare time, since 2015, I've been involved in civil rescue operations, mainly with Sea-Watch, but also with refugee rescue and also with Lighthouse Refugee Relief when they were in Lesvos. I've been doing that since 2015. I've been involved in some pretty hairy things. I've been involved in some missions where we didn't rescue anybody at all. And I've also been quite an active kind of campaigner for refugee rights as well in the UK. People around Europe won't necessarily have heard much about this, but there's my trade union in the fire service is a fire brigade union, and I've been quite instrumental in helping them get involved and understand that that it's a trade union issue, that refugee rights are human rights, and the fire brigade union has jumped all over it, and it become heavily involved in campaigning in the UK for refugee rights and migrant rights in general. And that's me.
Great, yeah, and the FPU is something in my other job. My job, I also work for the Morning Star newspaper, and we have stories about the FPU in there all the time. I think it's a great union, and I've seen it. I've seen them, on Twitter supporting you and sharing your book and sharing the stuff you did. I think it was quite a while ago now. They had, I don't know if maybe you was involved in that. They had someone that was a Spanish guy whose name I can't remember, who'd been involved in refugee rescue, and the FBU had him over to speak at an event. Do you remember anything about that?
Yes, I do. That was Miguel Roldan, and Miguel Roldan is one of the Iuventa 10, who have had their boat confiscated and are awaiting a ridiculous trial. And solidarity to all of those people, if any of them are listening. My heart goes out to you, still sat since 2017 on a useless and malicious, politically vindictive trial. And I thank you for all your work that you've done and all the campaigning that you continue to do and the strength that you have. So Miguel Roldan came over in 2019. And in 2019, actually, that was the year that I met Doro. I met him in January 2019. We rescued Doro at sea. 47 people we rescued that day. And when we got back to Italian waters, we were surrounded by military-looking ships. There were 7 of them, all with blue lights on top, and they refused us to come into land, and they refused us to leave. And we were effectively held captive at sea by the Italian authorities outside the port of Syracuse in Sicily. And I was supposed to go back to work, but I was late. And I called up the fire brigade union and said, "Look, I'm going to have to get in touch with my bosses and tell them why I'm not going to be there on time." And that's when the fire brigade union started getting involved. And they wrote to the foreign secretary at the time, demanding that they released me and the rest of the crew and let the people off the boat. And then they were like, who's this Brendan Woodhouse guy? We've never heard of him before, And then all of a sudden he's out at the sea and we're helping him. And then they invited me to the annual conference and they spoke to me a few times. And when I went to the annual conference, they had me speaking. They had Miguel Roldan also speaking. Sorry, that's my dog just charging into the room with his paws all over the floor.
But that's cool. I've listened to interviews with Noam Chomsky, and often his dog comes running in and he's barking and stuff. So that's cool. You're in good company. It's good to know that the FBU is involved, and I think I've seen a lot of other trade unions as well in the UK getting involved in this kind of thing. So it's definitely workers' rights or human rights or refugee rights, right? It's all the same stuff.
I believe so. I don't really think that everybody really grasps this, by the way. I don't think, like in the UK in particular, people don't really understand that the attacks on refugees are essentially an attack on us all, because what they're doing is trying to divide us and trying to break our solidarity with one another. And they divide us on racial boundaries, and they divide us on who's got the right to be here and who's not got the right to be here, who belongs and who doesn't, and who is worthy and who isn't. And when we allow them to do that, we allow them to erode our sense of who we are. They also in the UK are very intent, it seems, on persuading the general public that we want to leave the European Court of Human Rights in order for us to be allowed to deport 200 people to Rwanda. Now, the current plan is to deport people to Rwanda. The UK government's current evil plan is that, and they're constantly going to be blocked by doing that by the European Court of Human Rights. So they say that they're going to leave the European Court of Human Rights, but the European Court of Human Rights protects more than just those 200 people in Rwanda. It protects everybody. It protects every single worker's right, your right to strike, your right to protest, your right to not be harassed and monitored by the police, your right to not have your privacy imposed upon. Everything that we do, every human right that you possibly have is protected by the European Court of Human Rights. So it's everything to do with your pay terms and conditions. And some people in the trade unions perhaps need to grasp that these attacks on migrants are attacks on us all. We really need to work on better educating a broader section of society.
Absolutely, yeah. If you don't have any human rights, then you're not going to have any workers' rights, right? And you could be working 16-hour days, having children down the pits, and that kind of horrible stuff.
That's correct.
You mentioned it just a second ago about how you met Doro. So I wondered if you could sort of expand. Was it 2019 or was it 2017 or something? Just let us know how you met him. And it was in the Mediterranean, right? I think when you first met him.
That's correct. Yeah. So we had been searching for refugees for a little while. We'd arrived in early January 2019. We'd overtaken a previous crew, and there were still refugees on our boat, which was quite unusual. That these people, I can't remember, I think there might have been 32 of them, had spent Christmas on board the Sea-Watch 3 at the time. And I remember we took over from the crew, and the people on that boat were very nervous about a new crew arriving, because they'd been so used to being tricked and so used to being conned that they were quite frightened that they would be taken back to Libya. But I remember teaching a little girl called Aviva, teaching her to walk on the back of the deck, and I remember thinking, how could Europe leave this poor little girl out at sea for weeks and not just say, you're safe, come in, you're welcome? What kind of society do we have? Then eventually, as was always the case around about that time, political decisions were made. It was all a game of it's all a game with those human beings' lives, to force other European countries to feel so guilty that they would eventually offer some form of protection to the people on the ships, and then eventually they'd agree to take some of the people off Italy, and that's what happened there, and that's what happened in the case with Doro as well in the end. So we went out on the 19th of I think it was the 19th of January. We went out, the day before we'd been out searching. There had been a boat of 120 people that had gone missing, and it had been spotted by an Italian helicopter, and we went out looking for that in the western side of the SAR area.
Oh, I'll just say the SAR is the search and rescue zone, right? Or that's the area that Mediterranean is split up. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'd been in the western side looking for this boat of 120 people. The Italian helicopter had winched 3 people out of the water, and we went looking, 120 people, and we eventually found their boat, and there were no survivors. So 117 people drowned. We found their belongings. We found bits of wreckage from the boat. We found shoes floating, packets of cigarettes. And so we were all really, really despondent and sad that we traveled, because I think we took 15 hours to get there. They stood absolutely no chance. Europe just drowned them, man. Anyway, so the next day we go out looking for them. Go back to the eastern SAR zone, where we're looking at the weather conditions, and we think it's probably a little bit safer. And then we heard a report of a boat of 50 people. It was an hour away, and we went as quickly as we could to get to them, and eventually there it was, this little blue rubber boat, and there was 47 people on there in the end. They didn't believe we were Europe. They kept on going. They thought we were the Libyans coming to catch them, and then And then they saw our faces, and one of us shouted out, "You are safe now, you are safe." And then they all stopped. They were like, "No Libyan man would say this to us." And and they, we welcomed them onto the Sea-Watch 3. And that's really where I got to meet Doro, for the first time. He was a guy on the back of the boat. There's always somebody that can speak different languages, and there's always somebody that you use as an interpreter. And Doro can speak 12 different languages. So there he was, kind of. We were relaying the messages in English, and he was passing it back in Fuller, in Arabic, in French, and then somebody else was doing it in a different language as well. And me being very typically English, I can't necessarily associate one language from another. So, and we met Doro that way, and he came on a boat with the rest of the guys, and he was such a lovely guy, and somebody I gravitated to all the time. Yeah.
And you sort of he asked you. I think you and him became friends, right, on the boat. This is all in the book. Which is brilliant, by the way. I was saying before we started recording, I loved the book. I read it really quickly in like 2 days. I'm normally a slow reader. It takes me ages to read stuff. Blasted through it in 2 days, and I just couldn't put it down. It was really gripping. In fact, when I was, hopefully my boss is not listening, but when I was working, I was sat there reading it as well. So yeah, it's a fantastic book. But he said at some point during the time when you were on the boat together, he said to you that he wanted to write his story, and he wanted you to write it, right?
That's right. Yeah. So after we rescued Doro, we searched in the search and rescue zone for more boats for a little while, but then there was a storm coming, so we headed up to we asked Lampedusa for a safe port of entry. They said no. We went towards Malta. Can we have a safe port of entry? Of course you can't. Storm's still coming, so we went and hid off the western side the eastern side of Sicily, and we were quite near Syracuse at the time. We were invited to we in Italian national waters, so we were invited very kindly by the Italians to come towards their port and then to anchor up. I say invited. They surrounded us with 7 military-looking boats with blue lights on top, and shouted at us and told us that we needed to follow them. That we weren't allowed out of Italian international waters. We weren't allowed into the port. We had to anchor up, and they surrounded us. The only contact that we had with the outside world really was via the internet, or at one point they sent a paparazzi boat round to go and take photographs and say lots of mean things in the newspapers.
Bloody hell, that's terrible. I can't believe they did they won't let you guys come ashore, but they'll allow a paparazzi boat to come on board.
Well, that's just how they are. I mean, Matteo Salvini is a pretty despicable human being. He's the kind of guy that goes to church on Christmas Day and then allows children to drown in the Mediterranean the following day without so much as a blink.
I'll just say that Matteo Salvini is at that time when he was the Interior Minister, right, which is like the Home Secretary, I think, in the UK terms. But then now he's I think he's Deputy Prime Minister or something in Giorgia Meloni's. I think that's how you say her name. She's the Prime Minister or whatever, and Matteo Salvini has some role in her government. Still a scumbag.
Yeah, I still believe he's Satan's sub-officer. So, so we were we were there, and we were kept there for a couple of weeks, and after it became my time to get back to work, where I should have flown back to the UK. I went back to my cabin and I picked up my sleeping bag and my pillow, and I walked out to the back of the deck with the rest of the refugees that were there, and I laid my things down. I says, "Well, I'm in the same situation as you now. Of course, I'm not. I recognise I'm not in the same situation as them. Of course, I'm not. But I just wanted to give them a little act of solidarity to say, look, we're not, none of us allowed off this ship now. So I laid my sleeping bag next to Doro, I put my pillow next to him, and I lay down. And I think that really affected Doro, really, that little act of solidarity, which for me wasn't a great deal, just sleeping with the other people that are on the ship. As opposed to sleeping in a cabin. The only difference was I didn't have a mattress, do you know? And I slept with. The next day I woke up and had food with them, and Doro was very, very moved by it. Now a couple of the journalists that were on the ship had been speaking to him, and one of them had got a little snapshot of his story, and Doro said, "Oh, people keep asking me to share my story, but I don't want to." I'm like, well, you don't have to. Don't tell anybody your story. That's you own that. You don't need to. He says, no, I do want my story to be told. I need people to know about it. Will you say it? I says, well, if you want, I can do something, but you know, there's people that are journalists and all this. He says, okay, I want to see what's to say. I says, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And in the end, I agreed to write a little Facebook post for him about him, and to take some photographs of him to share with the story. And really, it was a small snapshot. And I'm taking the photographs of him, and the first photograph I go to take, and he's looking so serious. He's got like a serious looking face, trying to show the wounds and the scars, because he's covered in scars all over his body and face. And he's looking serious, and I wanted to break the ice a little bit, and so I said, "Come on, Doro, the camera loves you. You're beautiful." And he started to laugh because we had this relationship with one another. And then I took this photograph of him that he'd used on the front cover of the book. And when I wrote the post, I started that little Facebook post of, "This is Doro and he is beautiful," and I started talking about the wonderful humanity that he has in him, and then I spoke about the brutality that he'd faced in Libya and in the desert and at sea also, because this wasn't the first time he'd tried to cross that sea. And the next day, I was reading the comments that people had to say to Doro, and he was really affected by people saying nice things, people saying welcome to Europe. You know, this is we wish you safety and sanctuary. You know, I skimmed past a couple of nasty things that people had said. Then I went to the next positive one, and then Doro said, "Oh, will you? I want you to write my full story." And I said, "Oh, Doro, man, you know, I'm a firefighter. If you want your house putting out, I can do that. If you want your doors breaking in, I can do that. If you want your car chopped up, I'm your man. But when it comes to writing a book, let me get a journalist. Let me get an author. I can help you with that. Once we're off the ship, I can help you with that. But let me..." And he says, no, I need to share my story, but I only want to share it with a friend. And then you can tell the world. I said, okay, let me think. And eventually, after many times of this conversation happening, I agreed. But I said to him, I remember saying to him, I said, you know, when we do this, you don't have, we'll get your story written down, but we don't have to share it to be a book. But let's get your story written. But if we do share it, though, not everybody will be kind. Some people will say nasty things. Some people will say that you're not welcome. And he said, let them say that. They don't understand. They have never suffered like this. And he said, you see, some people, they only see skin. And I just remember being really awestruck at his humanity, that his understanding that an acceptance that some people won't welcome him, some people won't understand his story, some people won't take the time to listen or hear, and that he was fine with that. And then I got confident I could write the book, and that's what we've done.
And it's brilliant, and like, you know, what he's been through is insane. Like, he was. I mean, I don't think we should go into it completely. I think people should read the book to see his full story. But he left Gambia, right? I can't remember when. He travelled to somewhere else. I think he tried to get to Angola, was it? And then he ended up in Libya. And the stuff that happened to him in Libya is unbelievable. It's really horrific.
It is. I'm really going to come in quickly. So Doro has suffered a hell of a lot. I mean, absolutely. He left his homeland, then from Senegal, ended up in Angola, and then he had two desert crossings. It took many years to eventually come to safety. But this is really important to say. This isn't a story of some victim. This isn't like and not just of survival. It's a story of friendship, of hope, of and a descriptor in many ways of what is happening out in the Mediterranean Sea and what is happening on Europe's borders, and it's a story. It's a story. It's a story about just a simple man, just like me and you. Like refugees are. They don't have to be a hero. They don't have to be a villain. They're ordinary people, and this is just Doro's story through a political mess, and it's not unusual for people to have suffered like this at the moment.
Yeah, and he was forced to leave home, right? It was not, there's one thing that I hate when people distinguish between like economic migrants, refugees, and this kind of stuff. I really prefer the term people on the move, although it's kind of unwieldy. Um, but yeah, it's just the stuff that happens to him in Libya, and like you mentioned a minute ago, it took him 3 times to cross the Mediterranean. I think the third time was obviously when you 4 times. Took him 4 times to cross the Mediterranean. Yeah, and it's just and when I remember as I was reading the book and thinking like because you're reading it as Doro would, I imagine how he speaks. That's another question I want to get to actually, but I was reading that and then you think why like all the mess the political bullshit that goes around with people on the move or people seeking asylum in Europe, if you know their stories and you can understand why they need to get away from where they were, right?
And I think that's part of what this book's about as well. I think it's part of contributing with Doro contributing, and me also, I suppose, contributing to the many voices that need to be had in order for this message to be heard properly. A refugee is far better at articulating what's happened to them than I am. But there are many people that write these stories, and the refugee authors. There aren't many people that with Doro's perspective, where other people would say, "Oh, he comes from the Gambia. The Gambia is a safe country. We go to the Gambia on holiday," and you could look at Doro's story and say that he's a refugee. He is a refugee. He's got refugee status in France. But other people will maybe look at it and go, no, he's an economic migrant because he's done this. He went to a safe country and then he left that safe country and went to another one and then he crossed. And they could at any point in time they could confuse and obfuscate what the whole point of this is and the differences between. And that's part of what the story is about as well. Is about the blurred lines between, because people think it's an easy distinction to make. Well, what is an economic migrant and what is a refugee? And they say that these things are easy. They talk about them like they're easy to call the difference on, but they're not always easy. And for me, having witnessed and been part of the brutal border violence that is happening on behalf of Europe in order to keep our nations white, and to have tried to have done CPR on little girls and them die in my hands, to have seen so many people drowned, the fact of whether they're a refugee or an economic migrant, all is completely insignificant to me now. And I think that this story is part of the tapestry of that, of of our understanding. Hopefully, in the end, we understand that people should have the right to flee poverty. People shouldn't just be forced to live in destitution. People shouldn't be forced to live in the lives that we wouldn't accept for ourselves. Because you and me, we're both white people, yeah? We can go anywhere in the world. If I want to live in Australia, it wouldn't be too difficult for me to get out there. If I wanted to live in France, I could just get on a plane. I'd be there tomorrow. Or maybe I could get to most places today. Um, it's a question of finances, but as well. But it's also a question of racism and nationalism that that people will look at a guy coming from America into the UK and working in London. They don't look at them as an economic migrant. That's a guy that's come here to work. He's not an economic migrant. Of course, he is an economic migrant, but the perception of him is just that he's a guy that's come here to work. Whereas the second you get a guy from Africa, a black guy, there is suddenly this question of, oh, is he an economic migrant or is he a refugee? Well, I reject those notions entirely.
Same, yeah, it's bollocks, isn't it? Just the people are people, right? And it's always, I've said this a lot on the podcast. It's always weird. I've never liked the fact that I can go wherever I want. I've lived abroad for like a long time, and borders are generally always open for me. It's a little few like annoying bureaucratic hurdles, and then that's it. But for people like Doro or people, anyone like African people trying to get into Europe, it's a nightmare, and they have to just the things that they're forced to do to get here is just unreal. And like that's part of the borders, right? It's making it so hard to get here that you have to risk your life in order to get to the safety of Europe. It's fucked.
That's correct, yeah. And 27,000 people so far since 2014 have drowned in the Mediterranean Sea. I fail to see a world where we would allow 27 white people to drown and not put in a rescue operation.
Have you seen? I mean, this is really off topic, but there's in Rhodes at the moment. In the Greek island of Rhodes is like on fire, and lots of different parts of Greece is on fire, and there's people being evacuated, obviously. And I was just watching that and looking at the difference of, what's happening in the Mediterranean or Europe's eastern borders with people trying to find safety in Europe, but the difference when it's white people in danger. Lots of British tourists are there's stories in the press here about British tourists having to flee Rhodes, and there's lots of sympathy for that, but there's no sympathy or very little sympathy for people like Doro.
Yeah, I think the irony isn't lost on me when you see the interviews of people saying, "Oh, we were rescued by the Greeks on small boats," and some of those people that have been rescued on those small boats would have spent much of their time talking about not rescuing people on small boats. That irony isn't lost on me, and I think also, I mean, the UK, we're always talking. Well, I'm not, but some people are always talking about us being full. And they say that we can't accept the number of people because our infrastructure will collapse if we keep accepting 40,000 people that cross over on these small boats. But we accepted many years worth of Hong Kongers and Ukrainian refugees through schemes that we opened up to make sure that they were kept safe. We've got on the one side the Hong Kongers who perhaps come over with a bit more money. And we've got Ukrainians who are predominantly white. The rules suddenly seem to be relaxed, and we suddenly seem to have capacity. And we've accepted around about 250,000 Hong Kongers and Ukrainians over this last year, which is many years worth of small boat people. And our hospitals haven't collapsed. Our schools aren't at breaking point, and all the myths and arguments that the right wing used to say, they've all just been shown for the fallacies that we always said that they were, and it goes to show that we can operate schemes. There are ways of making these routes safe. And there are ways of breaking these smuggling gangs, because no smuggling gang has made any money off a Ukrainian crossing the English Channel, and no Ukrainian is drowned in that sea either. It's all unnecessary.
Yeah, and like, and if schools and my other job, you write about school crisis, housing crisis, NHS crisis, and stuff, but it's not migrants that are causing that problem. It's just years of underfunding and privatization and things that are fucking up the system, right?
Well, absolutely. I'll very quickly talk about the Fire Brigades Union here as well, because we could talk about our services being stretched and overwhelmed. You're right. Our services are stretched and overwhelmed. I work in the Fire Brigades Union. The fire service across the whole UK has dropped its funding by 20%. That's government cuts. That's austerity. That's what's cutting it, and the same can be said in the NHS and in schools, etc., etc. It is our government that has taken the money away and put it into the hands of the shareholders.
And so let's go back to the book. One thing that really surprised me when I started reading it is when the first part I got to, when Doro was speaking, or Doro was writing. It was written like with broken English, basically. And I thought, when I first started reading, I was like, oh, why didn't they correct this? Why was this? And then as I kept reading it, I was like, this is because I've spoken to people from Gambia. I think I've spoken to refugees. I've spoken to lots of people. I lived abroad for a long time, so I'm used to like hearing English like that. And then I just thought it could really picture him as I was, and you've got his face on the front of the book, and I just thought it was such a genius move to write how he speaks and not try to correct it, which as a journalist is something I do all the time when I interview people. It's particularly if they're from, if the English isn't their first language, I'll change it, send it to them and say, is this okay? And they've always said yes. So yeah, can you tell us why did you decide to leave it like that?
Yeah, so I originally, so I was trying. I'm not a journalist, right? So, and I'm not an author. I'm not used to doing all of this. So when I interviewed Doro, I interviewed him initially over the course of a week. I did a few interviews over WhatsApp and etc. But I went to see him first. I spent a week with him, interviewing him every day. And when I got back to the UK, I spent the first few months transcribing those interviews into a Word document. Somebody told me about a bit of software, but it couldn't pick up my Geordie accent, my northeast English accent. Never mind picking up Doro's strong Gambian accent. It just wasn't working. So I sat down and painstakingly listened to each sentence and then wrote it out. Listened to the sentence, checked I got it correct, moved on to the next one, and I did hours and hours worth of interviews, transcribing them onto Word documents in that way. And then I was sat with this vast amount of paragraphs and words, and lots of it all jumbled up, people like different parts of his journey in different places. So I spent a bit of time working out the timeline properly, getting it, and then I got those pieces in chronological order, and then I was sat with this document that was everything that he'd said in time order, with the questions that I'd asked as well. And then I was like, what do I do with this? So I got in touch with a friend of mine who's an author, and I sent it to her, and I says, oh, what do you think I should do? I says, I've got lots of different thoughts on this about how I could do it. I could do it like Pulp Fiction. I could start at one side and then come back to the boat, and then I could go back to his childhood, and then I could flip it backwards and forwards, or I could do, or I could talk about it chronologically. I've got a feeling I need to talk about the rescue first because people know that he's alive, and then talk about it chronologically. She said, "Yeah, that's definitely the way you should do it." She says, "I love the way that he speaks in there. I love the way that She says, "I'm so happy that you've not corrected it." And it was just that I hadn't corrected it yet, if I'm honest. Because I didn't know if I needed to write it in third person, if I needed to write it as if he said it, or if I needed to change it into grammatically pure English. And she says you can really pick up his voice, and I thought, yeah, you're right. So as I read through it all again, and I was like, I can hear him when I'm reading it, and I really like that. And she was entirely right, because she said that she could hear him, and I thought, well, that's going to be really difficult if you're going to read a whole book of as Doro speaks. It's important and it's good to do that, but I think what's needed as well is a bit of a break, where the English is perhaps easier to understand, where because Doro doesn't necessarily articulate the political situation in the Gambia. He doesn't necessarily articulate the political context of different things, or the laws of the sea, refugee law. So a lot of what happened to Doro is a result of policies that we've made. And I thought it was important to kind of articulate those. But also, much of the conversation, and this is what is, I tried to help pick up in the book, and I hope I've done it justice, but much of the conversation wasn't spoken. It was the way that Doro behaved, and the way that he acted, because when he was a lot of the time when he was talking about it, he was closing his eyes and picturing himself in those moments. And I remember I articulated at one point in the book when Doro found a woman in the desert, and I described how Doro had leant forward and brushed the imagined sand from her imagined cheek, and how he softened his voice, how he breathed more slowly as he tenderly, in front of me, relived this horrific moment. And I remember he spoke about her, and I wrote this in the book. It was one of my best pieces of writing. And I said that he spoke about her like she was the most important to the person in the world, and to somebody she was. And I think that it was important to me to try to articulate those bits as well, and try to break up the conversation a little bit by describing how Doro was reacting, and how we felt, and how I felt, and then reverting to times on the ship of happier moments, and not giving the reader too much trauma at once.
Yeah, and those bits that you're describing when when you're interviewing, there's parts of the book when you talk about interviewing him, and you're sat across from him, like you just talked about, when he's brushing the sand off that woman's face. Those bits were brilliant, and I felt like I was sat there with you two as you're describing it. It's a fantastic book. You should be very proud of it. I think you keep saying you're not an author, you're not a writer. Well, you are now, and it's absolutely brilliant. I just want to thank you for bringing this book out. I think it's so important for people to read, and I hope a lot of people have. It was you published it with Unbound, right? And you had to the Unbound is a publisher where they crowdsource all the books, right? I'm not sure if that's the right term, but people have to add money to it, and then you have to pre-order the book before they publish it. And so, what's the reception been like? I've seen you've done a bit. I've seen you on this social media. You've done a few like book signings and stuff, and things with the union and things like that. And how's the reception been? And how does it feel to be an author?
Oh wow! Do you know? I'm going to answer that last question first. It feels really bizarre. I went there were all the books arrived in a warehouse, and in Basildon. So I travelled 3 hours to Basildon to go and sign the signed copies that people had pre-ordered. And there were about 250 books to sign. Anyway, I get to the warehouse, and the security. And you've got to bear in mind that most of the time I think I'm a bit of an idiot. Most of the time I'm just joking with everybody at the fire station. They're teasing me for being small. I'm teasing them for having a big nose or big ears. And we're just laughing at each other all day long. And with each other. No, there's never any intent in any of these things. So I arrive at the warehouse, and bear in mind most of the time I'm just joking all the time with people, and I don't take myself seriously at all. So I arrive at this warehouse, and I wind down the window, and I pass over my identification to the guy, and he says, "Oh, are you the author?" And I just went, "Tee!" I couldn't believe that somebody would call me that, because it sounds so serious. And it felt bizarre, and that was the first time that anybody had ever said anything like that. But then, the book's out there now. Copies started to get sold, and I went along to the book signing, the original initial book launch, which happened in Nottingham, and I think there were 70 people there, 30 people from the Fire Brigade Union, from all around the country. People had travelled, and we all sat. They were all sat in the room, and well, I'd paid for tickets for Doro to come to the event on the Eurostar, but he was stopped at the border. His visa, his French refugee passport, wasn't enough for him to cross, and he applied for a visa. And the visa, people said, "You haven't got enough money in your account to come over." And we tried one way or another, and eventually he gets himself onto the train, and he was stopped by the British border security and refused entry into the UK. So his book launch, and the various other book launches that happened after that following week, we empty chaired Doro because he wasn't allowed to be there. So there was I'd be there, and there was a chair where he should be, and I think it was incredibly symbolic that here's this guy that's got a job in France. He's not an economic migrant. He doesn't want to come here to work. He doesn't want to come here and claim asylum even. He just wants to come and attend his own book launch and see his friend and go home. And we won't even let him do that. Anyway, so we went through the book launch, and they've gone really well. It's been really well received. I've had a lot of people say good things. It's been a shame not to be able to share this so much with Doro. I've rang him up. I've FaceTimed him after each event, and we've spoken about it, and he is excited. He's buzzing to hear the story, but he still isn't there. He still isn't able to see this groundswell of support that people are having for him, because it's not my story. It's his story. It's his book. I helped him write it, and why is it me that's allowed to hear it, and to see people being happy for him, and how's the book going down? So it's sold quite a few copies. I'm not sure where it's at now. I mean, I know it's over 1,000 copies have been sold. I doubt it's hit 2,000 yet, but I think the last time I looked at it, it sold 1,100 copies, which is just over a week ago. And but the success of it isn't measured in that. I mean, first of all, the success of it was measured in one copy, because I promised Doro that I was going to do this. And once he asked me, he asked me to do it, and I said I would write a book, and it would be finished, and I would give it to him. Once he had that in his hand, it was a success. But also, I've been contacted by people who have been right wing, who have read this book and said that it's changed them. I've had 4 people contact me that have said that they've previously voted for the Conservative Party in the UK, and they've been against people coming to the UK. But now that they've read it, their opinions have completely turned round. And
That's amazing.
And those 4 people, that's the measure of the success for me. Because a lot of the time we speak, and you'll speak, and on your podcast, I imagine the vast majority of people that will listen to this podcast will be supporting anyway. But if you can
if you can turn somebody around, that's really special, and that's what we need to do. And they were then going to be giving that book to relatives and stuff, which is brilliant. Now, um, if we have enough of those things happening, and like, because it's not just Doro's story. There's My Fourth Time We Drowned. There's Asylum Speakers with Jazz O'Hara. That's a beautiful book, by the way. Um, you know, the lightless sky, etc. If the more of these stories that get written, and the more the stories that get said, and the more conversations that we have, the more people that we will be able to turn collectively to help build a better world.
I think yeah, I think you're right, and I think once the story is kind of individualized, like you've done with Dora and those other books, some of them I've read. Um, it's really like I think that gets through to people, and often like if it's just coming through the media, particularly through the right wing media, then it's just like a blank slate. Everyone's here to take your jobs. Everyone's here to whatever live off £36 a week or whatever it is, and collapse the NHS. People hear that message all the time, and that's what they think. But it's really hard to counter that. And I think a good way is like what you've done with this book is to individualize it, and these are people just like you. Um, so yeah, I'm really happy that it's gone down. It's amazing that you've got four people. You've these four people who were previously voted the Tories, the Conservatives, and now they've changed their opinion. That's amazing. Um, and it's really sad that Doro couldn't make it to the UK. But you kind of mentioned this. Do you need to tell us just a little bit about his life now? Like, have you seen him recently? And
So, Doro's been in touch with me. Since we left the ship, we've been in contact a hell of a lot. Anyway, obviously we were writing the story together, but initially we weren't doing any writing. Initially, Doro was struggling really badly with his mental health, and he's fine. We've spoken about it. That when he arrived, that it's okay for me to talk about this, by the way. So when he arrived initially, he was sent to France, and he was separated from all of the other people that we'd rescued. Um, some of them were sent to France, some of them were kept in Italy, some of them went to different countries, and Doro was held back for a little while, went to a court case, and then was sent to France. But because he came after the others, they all went to one flat, and he went to a different place, and he felt quite isolated. And he's a very social kind of person, but he felt apart from everybody else. Um, and for a little period of time, he felt like he was put into a flat in France without knowing anybody, and without having contact with anybody, without knowing what support there was. There was some support there, but he, he didn't know people. Um, and we were speaking every day at that point, and it was me helping him at that point. Because later he comes to help me, and I'm going to talk a bit about that as well. But at that point in time, I was helping him, and I got in touch with. Eventually, I found a volunteer that helps refugees in the area that he's from, and she went down and helped him, and then took him to the library. Started driving him around, helping him meet asylum seekers from Africa in his area, and he built up a network of friends, and eventually his problems started to ease a little bit. She got him a psychologist and all that kind of stuff. She was amazing with him. Um, and then we were in contact quite regularly from then. But then once a book had been written, it dropped off to kind of, we would have a conversation, or with FaceTime. It's generally FaceTime. We'd do that once every couple of weeks instead of 2 or 3 times a week. Last year I had personal tragedy. My daughter was killed in a car accident. She was 18, and understandably I was absolutely crushed by that. It was the worst thing that's ever happened for me. And when Doro found out, the roles completely reversed. He was ringing me every day. He was checking in on me, and he was talking to me about hope and of keeping on going. And he was one of many people that contributed to keeping me alive, because there was a period in time when my mental health deteriorated to the point that I didn't see any value in my existence anymore, and Doro was one of, I would say, a key 5 or 6 people that kept me here. And that is what we can do for one another, isn't it? The power of friendship and the power of, the power of love that you have for one another, and the strength that we can give one another. I've given it him, and he's given it me. It's been really, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that you posting about that at the time. It's obviously really awful, really tragic thing to have to happen. But I'm really pleased that Doro was there for you and you had other people there, and you're still with us. So that's good. Um, and so now he's settled now in France, I guess, to a certain degree. Um, and are you still speaking to each other quite often?
Yeah, so we speak to each other at least once a week at the moment. Sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times, depending on how busy Doro is with work. Depending on how busy I am with work, we speak regularly. And Doro's now got refugee status. He's got leave to remain there for 10 years. Soon he'll be able to get French citizenship. He's working as a refugee at the moment. Working as an electrician at the moment for a prefecture, I believe. But he's been unable to get his children to come and join him. I think when he first arrived in France, he was so rushed and so stressed to get his documents filled in. He didn't fill them in correctly and didn't put the correct information on his documents, which is leading to him be unable now to get his children over to see him. And also the political situation in the Gambia and in Senegal has changed. It may change again, and it's certainly turbulent. But Doro's considering going back, and he's considering trying again to see what he can do about getting his children over, because he misses them, like we all would. Just so his story isn't settled yet. He's always going to feel incomplete without his family around him.
Well, yeah, I'm happy that he's safe. He's no longer in Libya, because that part of the book is really harrowing. What happens to him there, and people need to read that book. Need to read the book to find out about that. And you're going to sea soon. Are you going back to sea soon? I just assume that. Are you planning on going back with Sea-Watch or anyone else anytime soon?
Well, I've currently got an application in waiting, and I've got my annual leave all set up for March, April kind of time, and I hope to be away with either Sea-Watch, if the Sea-Watch 5 is up and running by then, or with another organisation if needs be. March, April kind of time. That's my kind of plan. I've got 3 weeks in March off already, and then when I book next year's leave, I'll try to get some time in April. So I've got a good set of 6 weeks I can go and do something.
Can I ask you, when you going to do that? Like, I mean, if it was me, I know. Do you look forward to it, or do you kind of have a bit of dread about it? Like, I can imagine if it was me, I would feel like kind of excited, but also a bit trepidatious, if that's the word, about it, really nervous about what's going to happen.
Yeah, I feel a mix of things. I feel excitement that I'm going to go and do something that I won't have done for a little while. That I'm going to go meet a load of new people on the ship, a new crew. I'll be apprehensive of are the crew all going to be cool? Am I going to get on with everybody? Whenever you join a new team, there's always that mix of trepidation and excitement, isn't there? I'll feel fulfilled that I'm going to go and do something. But there's also I think this is probably about 50% of that emotion is anger. that I'm having to give up my time, my annual leave, my holidays. They should be spent with my children in the sunshine. I should be looking forward to taking my girlfriend away somewhere. And I feel very duty bound to do something about what's happening in the Med, because I know that I'm capable of driving boats. I know I know I do search and rescue. I know that I've done 20 years in the fire service. I've got skills, medical skills, search and rescue skills that I can use out there, and I feel that I should do. If I've got those skills, I can't, in all good faith, just allow people to drown in the sea while I just go on holiday. I feel like I need to give some of my time to do something about that. And I feel resentment that our politicians have abandoned people. Not just abandoned them. That's giving them too much grace. They aren't abandoning people. They're deliberately drowning people in our sea. And I feel angry that that's happened, but utterly determined. That's a good word for how I feel when I'm going away. I feel determined and inspired and fired up, because I want to get my teeth into doing something about what for me is the biggest injustice in this world.
Yeah, and it's a great piece of activism, or direct action against what European states are doing or what they allow to happen and what they're causing, right? Brendan, it's been really, really great talking to you. We've been talking for about an hour now. So I was just going to end the interview now, but I wondered if was there anything else you wanted to talk about the book, or anything refugee, asylum seeker, people on the move related. Probably something will come to you when we finish the interview.
Yeah, maybe. What would I like to talk about? We've been talking an hour, and I'm probably a bit talked out, I guess.
Well, I was really happy to get you back on. I'm really glad you wanted to come back on the podcast. The last interview I remember was really good. This one was also really good. So thanks very much. Thanks for sharing everything that you've shared with us. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. So thanks so much, Brandon. It's been really nice having you on the Civil Fleet.
Well, thank you very much. Take care.
Well, that was episode 43 of the Civil Fleet podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to Brendan again for coming on the podcast. Like I said at the beginning, this is the second time he's been on. It was so great to get him on. Definitely check out his book. It's absolutely brilliant. I'm going to have links to where you can buy that. I'll put links on probably social media too. I realised while I was editing this, I think I called him I think I got his name wrong and called him Brandon a few times. Dyslexia strikes again. Sorry about that, mate. Hopefully you don't mind, or maybe you're used to it. I don't know. Anyway, sorry about that, Brendan. Also, what else do I have to say here? You can check out thecivilfleet.com for more news reports, that kind of stuff, investigative stories. Hopefully I'm working on something that could make it there. I don't know. What else do we have to say? Yes, if you want to help us to continue running the podcasts, to help us cover the costs, which are admittedly quite small, you can do that by going to ko-fi.com/civilfleet. You can give us a lot of money or a little bit of money, which will help. You can also share us about on social media. Oh, in fact, yes, like I mentioned at the beginning, we have this large t-shirt with the Civil Fleet's logo on it. It looks really cool. If you would like the chance to win it, then all you got to do is quote tweet the Civil Fleet, say something about the podcast in it, or share us a story on Instagram, tag us in that, and we will choose one at random and send it out to you. So yeah, that would be cool, wouldn't it? It'd be nice. Maybe in the future we can get a store up on the Civil Fleet. I don't know about that, but let's see how it goes. I don't know if anyone's actually going to want to win this t-shirt, but we'll see. Right, enough of this. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks again to Brendan. And go buy his book, and I'll see you soon.